Evelyn Hart never imagined that loving Alexander Blackwood would destroy her life. For 3 years, she had loved him from a distance. Not because he loved her back, but because he had saved her once. And to Evelyn, that was enough. Alexander was everything people admired. Powerful, intelligent, untouchable, the kind of man who walked into a room and instantly commanded attention. The kind of man who never had to raise his voice to be obeyed. Unfortunately, his heart belonged to someone else. Olivia Sterling, the woman he planned to marry. And Evelyn accepted that. She never tried to come between them, never confessed her feelings, never crossed a line. She simply loved him quietly, from afar, until the night everything changed. It happened during a charity gala. The city's elite filled the ballroom. Champagne flowed, music played, people laughed. It was supposed to be a celebration. Instead, it became a nightmare. A scream echoed across the ballroom. Olivia Sterling had fallen from the balcony. The entire room erupted into chaos. Alexander reached her first. Blood stained Olivia's dress. Her breathing was weak, terrified, broken. Panic filled his eyes. As her final breath slipped away, she weakly raised a trembling hand, pointing toward Evelyn. Then everything went still. She whispered one word. Her. Olivia died seconds later. The room erupted into chaos. Everything happened so fast. Police arrived. Questions filled the air. Rumors spread like wildfire. And Alexander looked directly at Evelyn, the woman he once trusted, the woman who had always been kind to him. His eyes were filled with something she had never seen before. Hatred. Pure hatred. I trusted you. Evelyn shook her head. No, Alexander, I didn't. Take her away. The words hit harder than any slap. No. Tears streamed down her face. Please listen to me. But Alexander refused, because the only woman he had ever loved was dead, and he believed Evelyn had killed her. The trial lasted only weeks. Powerful witnesses appeared, evidence surfaced, every piece pointed toward Evelyn. She kept insisting she was innocent. Nobody listened. Not even Alexander. Especially not Alexander. When the verdict was announced, Evelyn felt her world collapse. Guilty. 5 years. 5 years behind prison walls. 5 years of loneliness. 5 years of crying herself to sleep. 5 years of wondering how the man she loved could believe the worst about her. The worst day came during her 3rd year. Her mother became seriously ill. Letters were delayed. Phone calls were denied, and by the time Evelyn learned the truth, her mother was gone. She never got to say goodbye. At first she cried every night, then every week. Eventually, she stopped crying altogether. Outside prison walls, life continued. Inside prison walls, Evelyn felt forgotten. She stopped hoping. Then something happened. Something Evelyn never expected. She discovered she was pregnant. The child was Alexander's. Months before Olivia's death, a storm had stranded them together during a business trip. One unforgettable night had changed everything. Neither of them spoke about it afterward. And now, she carried his child. For the first time in years, she had hope, a reason to survive, a reason to keep fighting. She would protect her baby, no matter what. But prison was cruel, crueler than she imagined. One night, a violent fight broke out among inmates. Guards rushed in. Chaos exploded. Someone pushed Evelyn, hard. She fell down a flight of stairs. Pain ripped through her body. Agonizing, unbearable. Then darkness. When she woke up, the doctor wouldn't meet her eyes. Immediately she knew. Her baby was gone. Something inside Evelyn broke that day. Completely. Irreversibly. She cried until she could no longer cry. Screamed until she could no longer scream. And eventually, her voice disappeared. The doctors called it severe trauma, psychological shock. But labels didn't matter. The result was the same. That loss broke something inside her. Evelyn never spoke again. Meanwhile, outside prison walls, years later, the truth finally emerged. A retired detective reopened the case. What he uncovered shocked everyone. Witnesses had been bribed. Evidence he been Farrakaki Olivier's dish he been Orkeshraki be a corporate rival who wanted to destroy Alexander's empire, and Evelyn had been innocent all along. When Alexander received the report, he felt physically sick. The world blurred around him. For 5 years, an innocent woman had suffered because of him. For 5 years, he immediately ordered her release, then drove to the prison himself. Rain poured from the sky. Alexander stood outside the prison gates, heart pounding, waiting, terrified. Then he saw her. Evelyn stepped through the gates carrying a small bag. She looked thinner, older, tired. The bright woman he once knew was gone. The spark in her eyes had vanished. She looked fragile, broken, empty. Evelyn, his voice cracked. She simply stared at him, silently. I'm sorry. Nothing. Evelyn, please. Nothing. Tears filled his eyes for the first time in years. I'm sorry. Still nothing. Desperate, Alexander stepped closer. I'll do anything to make it up to you. Silence. Then he whispered, Can you at least say you forgive me? Before Evelyn could react, the officer looked at Alexander with disgust. You should leave her alone, sir. Alexander frowned. What do you mean? The older man's eyes were red, filled with anger, filled with pity. The officer's jaw tightened. Prison happened to her. She lost more than Agnon Schold. And whatever hope she had left dear years ago. Alexander's face drained of colour, and as Evelyn stood before him, silent, broken, unable to speak, even if she wanted to, the powerful Alexander Blackwood dropped to his knees, because he knew no apology could erase 5 years of suffering. 3 months passed, and every single day, Alexander Blackwood showed up. Not because Evelyn asked him to, not because she wanted him there, simply because guilt wouldn't let him stay away. Every morning he left flowers outside her apartment. Every evening he sat in his car across the street, watching, waiting, hoping. But Evelyn never acknowledged him. Not once. It was as if he no longer existed. One rainy afternoon, Alexander finally gathered enough courage to knock on her door. The door opened, Evelyn stood there. Her face was calm, emotionless, the same silence that haunted him every night. Alexander's chest tightened. He would have preferred anger, hatred, screaming, anything except this silence. I know you don't want to see me. Nothing. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. Nothing. His voice broke. But please, let me help you. Evelyn looked at him for several seconds, then slowly closed the door. Alexander stood there, alone. The sound of the lock clicking shut felt like another prison sentence. This time, for him. Weeks later, Evelyn began attending therapy, not because she wanted to heal, but because surviving wasn't the same as living. The therapist encouraged her to write instead of speaking, so she did. Page after page, notebook after notebook, years of pain, years of loneliness, years of grief. One evening, Alexander followed Evelyn from a distance, not because he wanted to invade her privacy, but because he worried about her. She spent nearly an hour sitting alone in a quiet corner of the park, writing. When she finally left, she seemed distracted, lost in thought. Several minutes later, Alexander noticed something on the bench. A notebook. Her notebook. He recognized it immediately. At first, he intended to return it unopened. Then a loose page slipped free, and the words he saw left him weak to his bones. Cold sweat beaded across his forehead. One page read, I cried for him every night in prison. The man who sent me there. Another page read, Dear Mum, they told me too late. I never got to hold your hand. I never got to say goodbye. I hope you knew I never stopped loving you. Alexander turns the page. Today marks 1 year since I lost my baby, the only light I had left. Alexander freezes. He stared at the words. His pulse stopped. His hands trembled. Baby? What baby? Turns another page. I used to place my hand on my stomach every night and imagine a future. A little girl with his smile, or a little boy with his eyes. Alexander's heart stops. Another page. I never told Alexander. He never knew. And now he never will. Then another. The day my child died. Something inside me died too. After that, speaking felt pointless. Nobody listened when I said I was innocent. Why would anyone listen now? Alexander couldn't breathe. Tears blurred the words. His hands shook violently. He couldn't imagine the hardships Evelyn had faced for years. Now he realized he had destroyed her. That night he cried harder than he ever had in his life. Alone. In the dark. Like a broken man. The next morning he made a decision. He sold his penthouse. Donated millions to organizations helping wrongfully convicted prisoners. Created a foundation in Evelyn's baby's memory. And personally reopened dozens of wrongful conviction cases. The media praised him, the public celebrated him, but Alexander knew the truth. None of it mattered, because Evelyn still wouldn't look at him. Months passed, then one winter evening, everything changed. Evelyn was walking home when a speeding car lost control on an icy road. People screamed. The vehicle slid directly toward her. Before she could react, someone shoved her aside. The impact echoed through the street. Evelyn hit the ground, dazed, confused. Then she saw him, Alexander, lying on the pavement, bleeding, unconscious. For a moment, everything stopped. Memories flooded her mind. The man who ruined her life, the man who destroyed her future, the man who had spent the last year trying to save everyone except himself, and suddenly, for the first time in years, Evelyn felt fear. Not for herself, for him. At the hospital, doctors worked through the night. Hours passed, then more hours. Finally, a doctor emerged. He's alive. Evelyn's knees nearly gave out. The next morning she entered Alexander's hospital room. He looked weak, fragile, nothing like the powerful man who once controlled entire industries. When he opened his eyes and saw her, he thought he was dreaming. Evelyn? She stepped closer. Tears filled her eyes. Alexander immediately looked away, ashamed. You shouldn't be here. Evelyn reached into her bag, pulled out a small notebook, and began writing. Her hands trembled. Then she handed him the paper. Alexander looked down. 4 words, only 4. I don't hate you. His vision blurred instantly. Tears rolled down his face. For the first time since her release, hope appeared. Not forgiveness, not yet, but hope. Months later, Evelyn continued therapy. Slowly, painfully, one step at a time. Then one spring morning, she sat beside Alexander in a garden. Birds sang, flowers bloomed, life continued. Alexander was talking about something completely unimportant, trying to make her smile, as usual. Then suddenly, he froze, because he heard something, a sound so small he almost imagined it. Alex, his eyes widened. Evelyn looked shocked herself, her voice, weak, broken, barely audible. But there, Alexander started crying immediately, and for the first time in years, Evelyn smiled, a real smile, not because she had forgotten, not because the pain disappeared, not because everything was fixed, but because she had finally chosen something more powerful than revenge. She had chosen to live. Years later, spring had returned to the city. The flowers were blooming, the skies were clear, and for the first time in a very long time, Evelyn Hart felt at peace. So much had changed. Her voice had slowly returned through years of therapy. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to laugh again. Enough to sing softly when nobody was listening. Enough to tell the people she loved that she loved them. And somehow, against all odds, Alexander Blackwood had remained by her side through every step of her healing. He never rushed her, never pressured her, never asked for forgiveness again. Instead, he earned it, one day at a time. On a quiet Sunday morning, Alexander drove Evelyn to a cemetery on the edge of the city. Neither spoke during the journey. They both knew why they were there. The wind moved gently through the trees as they stopped before a white marble headstone. Olivia Sterling. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Then Evelyn stepped forward and placed a bouquet of white lilies beside the grave. Alexander looked down. His voice was soft, filled with regret, filled with gratitude. If she hadn't pointed at you that night, he swallowed hard. I might never have discovered the truth. Evelyn looked at the headstone, then quietly said, She wasn't the enemy. Alexander nodded. No. For years, he had carried anger, blame, guilt, but standing there beside Evelyn, he finally felt something else, peace. Then Evelyn smiled softly. I think she'd want us to be happy. Alexander looked at her. The woman he had once wrongfully condemned, the woman he had nearly destroyed, the woman who somehow found the strength to love again. And suddenly, he knew that evening, as the sun set over the city skyline, Alexander took Evelyn to the place where they first met, the rooftop garden overlooking the city lights. Evelyn laughed when she realized where they were. You planted this. Alexander smiled nervously, something he almost never did. Then he slowly dropped to one knee. Tears immediately filled Evelyn's eyes. Alexander, his hands trembled. For perhaps the first time in his life, the powerful billionaire looked terrified. Evelyn Hart, his voice cracked. I can't change the past. Tears streamed down his face. I can't give you back the years you lost. He opened a small velvet box. I can't bring back the child we never got to meet. Evelyn covered her mouth, already crying. But if you'll let me, Alexander looked up at her. I'd like to spend the rest of my life making new memories with you. The city lights sparkled behind them. Evelyn, his voice shook. Will you marry me? For a moment, neither spoke. Then Evelyn nodded through her tears. Yes, Alexander laughed. Actually laughed, for the first time in years. And as he slipped the ring onto her finger, it felt like the beginning of something beautiful. Not because the pain had disappeared, but because they had survived it. Together, 1 year later. They were married. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter. 3 years after that, a son. The house that had once been filled with silence became filled with laughter. Tiny footsteps, bedtime stories, family dinners, and love. So much love. One evening, Alexander stood in the nursery holding his sleeping son. His daughter curled up beside Evelyn on a nearby chair. The setting sun painted the room gold. Alexander looked at his family, then quietly whispered, Thank you. Evelyn smiled. For what? Alexander's eyes filled with emotion. For giving me a second chance. Evelyn reached for his hand, and this time, she never let go, because sometimes the deepest wounds take years to heal. Sometimes forgiveness feels impossible, and sometimes the person who breaks your heart becomes the person who spends the rest of their life putting the pieces back together.